I'm so excited for this training. Together, we are going to be able to bring so many more people to Jesus. We're going to learn how to make your whole church sensory friendly. It's going to be easier than you even think. All it really takes is understanding, awareness, and a few simple steps. The first thing I want everyone to know about sensory processing issues is that it affects all ages, from newborns all the way through the lifespan to the elderly. Also, I want you to realize it affects even more people than you may even realize. Research shows that sensory processing issues affect from 5% to 16.5% of the general population. And that's because there are a lot of causes of sensory processing issues. Of course, there's sensory processing disorder, but there's also things like autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit disorder, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, and even COVID, and the list really could go on and on. We have all really experienced sensory processing issues. For example, if you've ever gone to the optometrist and had your eyes dilated, then you know how painful light can be. And that is like a sensory processing issue for people that are hypersensitive to light and vision. If you've ever had slowed or dulled reactions after you're on medication or been sick, you know what it feels like to be under-responsive. Other things like being completely overwhelmed in a noisy, crowded store or concert, that supersonic hearing you get in a dark alley at night is like hypersensitivity to sound. Also, dizziness or vertigo that you can get after a sinus infection can be very much like gravitational insecurity for people. So I want us to think about those things as we talk through our training and help us to really have empathy for people that are experiencing these kind of issues 24/7. And it really just kind of goes back to the golden rule, doesn't it? We want to treat others the way we want to be treated. So we're going to dive right in right now to the basics of sensory processing, how it works. So first, we receive sensory information, sensory input all the time through all of our different senses. And then all of that sensory information goes into our brain, and our brain filters and organizes all of that information to make it usable so that we can respond to our environment in a functional way. So, what happens if your brain lets in too much information? It is called over-responsive. And I brought in a piece of fire hose today, and it's really big, as you can see. And so when we think about over-responsive, I want you to think about a flood of sensory information coming in. This is when the brain is not filtering out everything that it should, and there's just too much sensory information coming. It's like a fire hose of sensory information coming at you. It can be very overwhelming. It can cause an overload. It can cause hypersensitivities. It can cause people to want to avoid different sensory stimulation in their environment. It can also cause what's called a meltdown or a shutdown. And this is really important to know about because a meltdown and a shutdown are actually neurological responses that happen in the brain. A meltdown can look very much like a tantrum or just bad behavior, but a meltdown is not the same. It is actually a neurological response that happens in the brain called fight, flight, or freeze. And what is happening is your brain is actually perceiving this deluge of information as a threat. And so it starts sending in all the neurochemicals to flood the brain to deal with this threat. So it can send our body into an overload. It can send us into a meltdown, which really can look like a tantrum, but it's not a tantrum. It's that neurological response. It can also cause a shutdown, which is where literally your body just shuts down, retreats inside yourself, and you just need a break and a moment. But it's not something a person can control. Meltdowns and shutdowns, a person cannot control. They are not a behavior. So I think it's really important to remember that. At best, this hypersensitivity, this over-responsiveness can feel extremely uncomfortable, all-consuming, and exhausting. At the very worst, it can be literally painful. It can cause nausea, sickness, and like we talked about, those meltdowns and shutdowns, which are also extremely uncomfortable and can feel really embarrassing if you're out in public. It can cause a lot of panic and anxiety. So we just want to be really conscientious and aware of people that may be over-responsive to their environment because of sensory processing issues. Now, on the completely other side of the spectrum, what if the brain is filtering out too much information and not enough information from our environment and from our senses is coming in? That's like this garden hose. In fact, it might even be clogged, and it's like just trickling, and just a trickle of sensory information is getting through. So that person is actually needing input. They are under-responsive, and they are in a drought. They are in a sensory drought. They are actually craving and starving for sensory input. These people might be seeking sensory input, and so sometimes you hear that term seeking, or they also may just be completely oblivious to what's going on around them because they're not really registering that sensory information coming in, those sensory cues in their environment. They may also have delayed or muted responses because really, remember, it's just a drought. It's a trickle of information coming in. They're not getting enough sensory input from their environment. I think it's really important also to know that a person can have both under-responsive and over-responses in the different senses at the same time. And it can be any combination of over and under-responsiveness. So that can be really difficult for a person. Sensory processing impacts our behavior, our cognitive processing, and our social interactions. So it can really be an issue for people in public, places like church. So in our series, I want us to learn about the challenges in a church setting for a person with sensory processing issues. I want us to learn what we can do as a church to help people so we can make simple accommodations. We can provide tools, and we can make really just small changes that make a huge difference for people to be able to attend our churches. And we also want to notice and be aware of the signs of sensory processing issues so we can be helpful and reach out to them. I'm Charla, your friendly OT, and I would love to consult with you if you have any specific questions about your church or your ministry events and how to make them sensory friendly.